This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us, Dr. Graham Allison. Dr. Allison is the director of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, the author of a new book, Destined for War: Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? The website, hks.harvard.edu. You can tweet at Kennedy_school. Dr. Allison, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for the historical readout that I just heard. It's not many radio programs in which people remind us about history.
Well, thank you. That was, yeah, thank you. First of all, not being a Greek scholar, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing his name, but what is Thucydides' trap?
Well, you're doing well. Yeah, Thucydides, for your listeners though, the fact that it's multisyllabic is not too hard.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's a mouthful, it is. But Thucydides is easy to say. So Thucydides, okay? And I think you're going to hear more about Thucydides. Thucydides was the founder of history, as we know it. He was the first person to try to write down what actually happened and get the facts right. And he thought that was important because it was for the purpose of successive generations being able to read what had been done in the conflict between Greece and Sparta in classical Greece, and learn those lessons and not make those mistakes again. So Thucydides wrote about this famously, a line that says, quote, "It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable." So this pattern is as old as history itself, and it's the best image or best lens, I think, for understanding what's happening in the relations between a rising China and a ruling U.S.
So, in essence, it sounds like what you're saying Thucydides' trap is that when one state is rising and at risk of eclipsing another state in terms of political, economic, or military power, that simple act in and of itself triggers an inevitable or frequent common confrontation, military confrontation?
Absolutely, but a little more complicated, but you got the basic. A rising power that credibly threatens to displace or eclipse a ruling power creates a deep structural stress between the two parties. So the rising power very naturally thinks, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, my interests deserve more weight than they used to get. I deserve more say, I deserve more sway. The current arrangements are confining because they were made before I even counted. So this is all very natural. And the ruling state thinks, wait a minute, the status quo is the way things are and the way things should be. And the status quo has actually provided the order that's allowed you, rising state, to rise. How did you become bigger and stronger? So this dynamic in what's called by social scientists hierarchical dominance systems, you can see this in gorillas when the alpha gorilla is challenged by a wannabe. You can even see it in companies when an incumbent is challenged by a disruptive upstart. Take the taxi industry and Uber, or Google and Apple versus Microsoft and Netscape. We can even see it in families. So in any case, Thucydides says in international relations, when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, this creates a pattern of behavior by both of them in which there's zero trust, because I really think what you want to do is displace me.
Right.
And you think what I really want to do is keep you down. And misunderstandings are then magnified, and then most importantly, external actions that would otherwise be inconsequential or easily manageable can trigger actions and reactions by the two of us that end up in a place neither of us want to be. So in the book, I look at 16 cases in the last 500 years, 12 of them end in war, 4 of them in no war. So inevitable is exaggeration. But in these conditions, rarely does one party or the other say, I think this is a good time for a war. So not that. Rather, what happens is, like World War I, Germany is rising rapidly, creating fear in Britain. Britain and Germany get more entangled with each other, with allies. And then the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo by a Serbian terrorist, which would otherwise have been an inconsequential event that hardly would have gone noticed and certainly wouldn't have had any great ricochet effect, became, in effect, the match that created a fire that at the end of the story had burnt down the whole House of Europe.
Yeah. Are you suggesting that this is the collision course on which the United States and China are going? They seem to be the major rising power in the world right now.
I argue in the book that business as usual will likely produce history as usual. But on the other hand, this is not a pessimistic or fatalistic book. Only those who fail to study history are condemned to repeat it. So if, God forbid, America and China find themselves in a war next year or the year after or this year, I mean, for example, if the North Korean events that are currently going on become like the assassinations in Sarajevo, a trigger to we respond by attacking North Korea, then North Korea attacks South Korea, then South Korea and the U.S. attack North Korea to try to suppress, and pretty soon you have the Second Korean War.
Right. Now, although in this case, China and North Korea have a mutual defense pact, and so they would jump in just like we would with South Korea. Now we're at war with China.
Right. And you would say, does anybody in China want a war with the U.S.? Absolutely not. Anybody in the U.S. want a war with China? No. But Kim Jong-un is not consulting either of us. He's doing his actions. He's under some pressure from us and under some pressure for them. But I don't believe that in Beijing there's any sympathy for Kim Jong-un. If they could make him go away, they would. But when they look at it, I've talked to a lot of Chinese about this, they say, well, and this goes back to the Thucydides dynamic, there really wouldn't be a problem on the Korean Peninsula if you weren't there.
Yeah.
What are the Americans doing there right, next to our border? And we say, wait a minute. We're there because North Korea attacked South Korea. We came to South Korea's defense. South Korea is a great success story. It's a democracy, a market economy, the 13th largest economy in the world. So we're not going anywhere. And they think, yeah, that's just what you're doing. You're trying to surround us and contain us and keep us from the natural influence that we should have as we've now become big, strong, and great.
So John Pilger made a movie that came out about 6 months ago called The Coming War with China. It's an hour-long documentary, and in it he goes through this whole narrative of how the United States has basically encircled China. We've got 400 military bases around them. The Spratly Islands are becoming a provocation. China is militarizing these islands that we're still not recognizing as Chinese territory. We're moving warships into the area. He's just coming right out and saying there is going to be war with China, and the United States is blundering into it, essentially. I'm not sure I fully agree with that analysis, but what, in your opinion, what can or should we do to avoid something like Thucydides' trap, a war with China?
I haven't seen the movie, but I will look at it. In the book, I have a chapter called From Here to War, in which I trace out 5 paths in which, by simply putting one foot in front of the other, the way we have been doing, I would characterize what we've been doing for the whole 21st century as business as usual. So both under Obama and under Bush and under Xi and under his predecessor. So if we just, in these 5 scenarios, just putting one foot in front of the other, for example, China building islands and then militarizing islands and then doing their 9-dash line, in which they say all of these territories in the South China Sea belong to us. And then even saying, as I have a little riff in the book on a Chinese guy tells me, he says, look at your own map. What's the name of this body of water that's on our border? It's called the South China Sea. It's not called the American Sea. So why should the U.S. Navy be the arbiter of events in the South China Sea of who owns an island or who can build an island? And we say, wait a minute, we've been there since Midway. The presence of the U.S. Navy has provided the international order for Asia that's allowed all of Asia, including you, to have the greatest period of growth you ever saw in the world. So you should be very grateful for having us there. They say, just the way Teddy Roosevelt said to the British and to the Spanish, we're now big and strong, so get the hell out of our hemisphere. We said. They're saying, basically, you're the problem, not us.
Yeah.
So what to do, I think first is most important is to recognize this inherent structural stress, which makes credible something like Sarajevo producing an outcome nobody wants, as opposed to incredible. And it's very hard for most listeners, most people in America today, to imagine a war between great powers because, God help us, we've had 7 decades without any great power wars. So students of mine at Harvard often say, wait a minute, that's just last century, past century, that's gone, consigned to the dustbin of history. But again, that's historically ignorant. Great power, long periods without great power wars are anomalies. So we should be grateful for it. We should work hard to maintain it. We should recognize what things have been done to help maintain it. So first is recognize the danger. Secondly, you would hope that Americans and Chinese leaders would sit down like adults and say, look at this situation. This is very dangerous. How can we work together to manage this fellow Kim Jong-un or similarly events in the South China Sea? And in some of those cases, that's going to require compromise and adaptation and adjustment, which, of course, ruling powers don't like to do.
So we and the Chinese need to acknowledge this right up front and start negotiating is the wrong word, but start talking about compromise.
Right. Well, working our way through the ways in which
the New World Order, essentially.
Yeah. If you imagine, I imagine, I test students. Imagine there were adult supervision. Now, first, notice there's not. In international affairs, there's a jungle. There's nobody superior to Trump and Xi. But let's imagine, just for hypothetically, there were. So there's this Martian adult strategist, and she parachutes down to Mar-a-Lago.
We just have about 20 seconds, sir.
Okay, it says, guys, look, be adults. Look at your problems. You have big problems, each of you, for yourself. You should figure out how to deal with this, and if you can't, let me give you some suggestions. So I would say, let's imagine some adult behavior in both parties, and I think if so, we can escape Thucydides.
There you go. A marvelous suggestion. Dr. Graham Allison, director of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, author of the new book, Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? Dr. Allison, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.